All right. This is Larry Hoy, biker writer legend, and you made it back to the First Chapter podcast, where I introduce you to some of my favorite books, and I give you the first chapter for free. So, let's see what's on the agenda for today, will ya? Hey, fantastic. Glad to see you. All right. So, today's book we've got is The Treasure Hunt Club by Michael Scott Clifton. Boom, right there it is. Bumped into Michael down there at SpaCon, Hot Springs, Arkansas. A wonderful time. Thank you very much. If you guys ever get the chance to get out there and meet me, SpaCon's a fun place to be. All right, so let's see what we've got on the backside. All right, the Treasure Hunt Club revolves around a mysterious and magical book, the Book of Lost Treasures, which can reveal the location of anything that has been lost. The book's discovered by Nick Hollister, a 30-something ne'er-do-well who finds it secluded within the frame of an old painting he purchased at an antique store. Deciding to concentrate on finding antiques such as rare baseball cards, coins, jewelry, and other antiques, the Treasure Hunt Club members engage in a cross-country quest to recover these valuable items. Within a short period of time, Nick and the other club members become wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, and that's when the troubles begin. All right, let's go see what happens in the first chapter. Okay, chapter 1. Duncan again. Struggling mightily, Nick Hollister futilely tried to prevent his head from being submerged a second time in the toilet. With water streaming down his face and his wet hair plastered to his head, he was held upside down by 4 hulking football players. Their leader, Carter Cannon, stood off to one side smirking. "I told you, JV, that the varsity locker room was for varsity players. Since your dimwit brain doesn't seem to get the message, I guess we'll just have to teach you the lesson you won't forget." When his head poised just above the toilet bowl, Nick said, "Damn you, Carter, I was just cleaning out my locker." Laughing, Carter gestured with his hand, and Nick was dunked again. Striding over, Carter flushed the toilet as Nick's head was held under the swirling water. Dropping Nick, the football player stepped away as Nick flopped wetly over onto his back, gasping like a fish. "One last warning. Stay out of the varsity locker room, Hollister," Carter growled. With that, he and the football players left, their derisive snickering slowly fading as they walked away. Tears of anger and frustration, mixed with the commode water dripping down from Nick's face, he slammed his fist repeatedly against the stall divider. Nick finally stood unsteadily, kicking the door of the stall open. Nick stalked to his locker, where he hastily stuffed the remaining items of clothes and personal possessions into his bag. Slamming the locker door shut, he left without a backward glance. "Wonder where Nick is?" Mark Chambers asked his girlfriend Patty as they sat together in the Pleasant Mountain High School cafeteria. "He's never late for lunch." "I don't know, but Nick promised me he'd turn in a senior profile sheet for the yearbook today. Even though I'm one of the editors, the deadline's tomorrow and it can't be extended. I explained that to him." Mark mumbled something unintelligible in response as he continued to chew on his turkey and cheese sandwich. Bringing the sandwich up to his mouth in preparation for another bite, he froze as he saw his friend Nick suddenly enter the cafeteria. Nick's face was red and water dripped from his hastily slicked back hair. Spotting his friends, Nick stormed over to their side of the table and threw himself in a chair beside them. "Nick, what happened to you?" Mark asked, shocked at his friend's appearance. Fuming silently, Mick tried to compose himself so he could answer. Finally, and with great effort, he managed to rein in his temper. "Well, let's see. The festivities all started when Coach Gaffrey told me I didn't make the varsity basketball team and I'd be on the JV team. Again." "Oh, no, I'm sorry, Nick," Patty said, squeezing his arm gently. "Anyway, as I was cleaning my stuff out of the varsity locker room, Carter and 4 of his Neanderthal buddies walk into me, and the next thing I know, I'm upside down and getting a toilet bath." Mark, his sandwich forgotten, couldn't believe his ears. Carter's gone too far this time, Nick. You got to go to Mr. Bosnick and tell him what he's been done. And what good would that do, Mark? Nick asked, his voice rising. Carter's the star athlete, the star student, and his dad owns all the premier card dealerships in a 5-county area. It'll be his word against mine, plus that of his 4 thick-necked friends. I'll be laughed right out of the principal's office. Before either Mark or Patty could respond, Nick pulled a piece of paper and a pen from a book bag he had slung around him. Writing furiously, he stopped abruptly and shoved the paper towards Patty. Here's my senior profile sheet, Patty, Nick said, his voice shaking in anger. Where it says, what are my plans for the future? Note that I've said I want to be as far from this stinking town as possible. The day I graduate, I'm out of here. With that, Nick slung his book bag over his shoulder and stormed out of the cafeteria. Little did Nick know just how difficult that would prove to be. All right, short chapters. Chapter 2. 15 years later. Strike one! Nick Hollister stepped out of the batter's box as the umpire behind the plate adjusted his mask. Idly, he brushed back his sandy blonde hair that had fallen across his pale blue eyes. Freckles graced the bridge of his nose and cheeks, and a square chin jutted from underneath lips, now pursed in concentration. Tall, he stood about 6'3". Unfortunately, despite his best efforts, he had never gained enough weight to fill out his frame, and soaking wet he only weighed a mere 160 pounds, when his skinny frame, combined with hands and feet that were unusually large, it gave him a gawky, ungangly look. Taking a deep breath, he stepped back into the batter's box. The pitcher toed the rubber and grinned incessantly at Nick. Nick's team was behind 35-0 in this Division I City Rec League slow-pitch softball game, and they were only in the third inning. None of the games so far had proceeded past the third inning since the 15-run mercy rule took into effect then. To add insult to injury, the opposing team's players had all been batting left-handed since the second inning, and they were still scoring runs at will on them. The beatings were depressingly common, and Nick's team couldn't come close to winning a game the entire summer. In fact, they hadn't scored a single run in the past 5 games combined. However, with a runner on third and 2 outs, all Nick had to do, break the scoreless streak, was to hit a single to score the runner. The pitcher released the ball, and it looped upward in a lazy arc before coming back down into the catcher's mitt, just wide of the plate. Ball 1! Nick stepped out of the batter's box and wiped the sweat from his eyes with his jersey. It was almost the middle of July, and the day was typically hot for East Texas Day in the city of Pleasant Mountains, population 19,983 souls, with the temperature hitting the high 90s and over 50% humidity. Located roughly halfway between Dallas and Texarkana on the I-30, Pleasant Mountain sits squarely on the Piney Woods region of East Texas. Come on, Nick, get a hit! A voice sounded half-heartedly from Nick's dugout. It was noon, and the sun was a blazing yellow ball on the cloudless sky directly overhead, with not a breath of wind stirring. Looking back at his teammates sitting in the dugout, Nick saw a mostly dispirited lot, fanning themselves with their gloves in the unrelenting heat. Nick had known most of them since they had all graduated from high school years earlier. He could tell that, like him, they just wanted to get this game over and go someplace, preferably at least 20 degrees cooler, other than the softball field. That they were playing in a Division I softball league against semi-pro players was, of course, all Nick's fault. They normally played Division II, the lowest league, and the one made up of the least skilled players. More importantly, most teams and players in Division II were looking to have actual fun while playing softball. Nick had been responsible for turning in the application for the team, and unfortunately, the time had slipped away from him, and he turned it in after the deadline had passed. The only softball league still taking applications was the super competitive Division I. He had been forced to turn his team's application for Division I, and so now they were playing ex-high school and college jocks who treated every contest as if it were the 70th and deciding game of the World Series. Nick had also been part of his team's second softball-related disaster, in that he accidentally had been responsible for the uniforms his team was now wearing, rather than obtaining the uniforms from a reputable sporting goods store in town as they normally did. He convinced the team instead to order them from a cut-rate out-of-town wholesaler to save money. The wholesaler had gotten both the name and color of the uniforms wrong, later claiming he couldn't read Nick's scribbled writing on the order form. So instead of their team being named the Bombers and the name on each softball jersey was the Boogers, and the color, instead of Carolina blue, was guacamole green. The wholesaler had refused to return their money or change the jerseys, so they'd been forced to wear the jerseys. The natural result was that in addition to being massacred after each softball game, Nick and the rest of the team were also had to endure the litany of nose-picking jokes. "Ball 2!" the umpire cried, as the next pitch was again slightly wide of the plate. "Come on, JV, are you afraid to swing at the ball?" Nick's eyes narrowed as he honed in on the source of the voice. It came from the opposing team's first baseman, Carter Cannon. Like everyone else on his team, Carter was impeccably dressed in a new, crisp Cannon Auto Group softball uniform, which did not conceal his bulging muscles underneath. Though he had the looks of a Southern California surfer with piercing blue eyes and sun-bleached blonde hair, Carter and his family had actually moved into Pleasant Mountain from Atlantic City, New Jersey, when Carter was in the first grade. How the Cannon family had acquired their wealth was the subject of much whispered speculation in Pleasant Mountain. Some said Carter's father was somehow connected to the mafia back in New Jersey, while the others said he made most of his money through shady deals, kickbacks, and shakedowns. As the proverbial thorn in Nick's side, Nick's introduction to Carter had been in grade school, when Carter walked up to him and shoved him face first off the playground swing. Carter had taken great enjoyment in making his life miserable for him ever since. In short, Nick hated Carter Cannon. "Take a swing, JV. Maybe you get lucky and get a hit." Laughter erupted from Carter's team, which was made up of mostly employees from Cannon car dealerships, and Nick felt his face begin to turn red. Angrily, Nick stepped back into the batter's box. He would show that Cannon a thing or two about hitting. He grit his teeth and waited impatiently for the next pitch. As a high looping pitch came down over the plate, Nick swung as hard as he could, missing the ball almost, spinning himself completely around from the effort. "Strike 2!" Carter almost fell down. He was laughing so hard at Nick. Way to go, JV! Next time, make sure your bat actually hits the ball," he said, gasping. His face now beat red in anger and embarrassment. Nick stepped out of the box, tried to control his breathing. He would get a hit, he thought. He and his team would score and avoid the shutout. Finally, he managed to compose himself. He stepped back into the batter's box. When the next pitch was delivered, he was ready, swinging. He connected solidly with the ball, sending it sharply down third base line. The runner at third took off for home as soon as Nick's bat hit the ball. Running hard for first, Nick risked a glance at the third baseman and saw him dive for the ball. Man, aging to knock the ball down with his glove, the third baseman bobbled the softball in his haste to pick it up and throw to first. Nick felt his heart leap. He was going to make it. He was going to be safe at first, and they were finally going to score. Putting his head down, Nick ran for all he was worth for the first base bag. Just as he was about to safely reach first, Carter stuck his leg out in front of the bag. Nick tripped over Carter's outstretched leg and cartwheeled past first base before he finally came to a stop, face down in the infield dirt. Spitting dirt out of his mouth, Nick got up quickly. Enraged, he headed for Carter. You look like a moon pie, JV!" Carter crowed, laughing as he pointed at Nick's face. Indeed, the red dirt of the infield was caked onto Nick's sweaty face so that despite his obvious anger, it gave him a comical appearance. "You bastard! You did that on purpose!" Nick yelled as he pointed, shaking his finger at Carter. "I can't help it if you're clumsy, JV. Next time you touch the base before tripping over your own 2 feet," Carter replied coolly. This was too much for Nick, and he made for Carter. Before he got 2 steps, the Boogers' first base coach interposed himself between Nick and Carter. "Nick, stop!" The Boogers' first base coach was Mark Chambers. He and Nick had been best friends since elementary school. Mark's brown eyes looked up at Nick with concern as he strained to hold him back. At 5'10" in a slender build, Mark was significantly shorter than Nick. "You saw what he did, Mark. He tripped me on purpose." Nick cried out, his voice trembling in anger. "What about it, ump? Did you see what happened?" Mark demanded. The umpire was a skinny, red-headed high school kid with bad acne condition. He had a prominent Adam's apple, which was bobbing up and down as he tried to form a reply. "We need a call, ump. He's out, isn't he? I mean, he completely missed the bag," Carter pointed out smugly as he ran. The rest of the team slowly formed a semicircle around the umpire. With his Adam's apple now bobbing frantically, the umpire looked around the mass of muscle surrounding him and decided the correct call required more than $20 he was paid per game. He's out?" the kid said in a quivering voice. "What? That's crap!" Nick yelled, ripping himself from Mark's grip. Nick headed for Carter. "You can't get away with... Ugh!" Nick folded up like an accordion as Carter's right jab landed sharply in his midsection. Air exploded from his lungs and he crumpled to the ground, fighting to breathe. "Don't crowd me, Hollister," Carter said with a dangerous smile on his face. "Damn you, Carter, leave him alone," Mark cried angrily as he pushed him back and tried to help Nick back to his feet. "Hey, Cannon, I got something for you." Through the eyes still bleary in pain, Nick looked up and saw a figure from the Boogers' dugout heading toward Carter. As he fought to bring his eyes into focus, he finally saw that it was Steve Patterson approaching Carter. After Mark, Steve was probably Nick's best friend, his watery green eyes flashing dangerously as he approached Carter. Steve had dropped out of a high school his senior year and eventually gotten a GED. To everyone's surprise, he'd gone to a tech school at a nearby college and had become a certified diesel mechanic. He now worked as a mechanic at Doc's Auto Repair in Pleasant Mountain. Steve was only a trim 6 foot tall, but he was extremely muscular, and he removed the sleeves from his Boogers softball jersey, and one large bicep sported a tattoo, flaming guitar with the words "Born to Rock" inscribed on the guitar. Steve was into heavy metal and played the drums every weekend for a garage band. Taking a pull from a Coors Light bottle with his right hand, Steve stopped a few paces from Carter, his eyes never leaving Carter's face. As long as he had known him, Nick had never known Steve to be very far from a can, a bottle, or a mug of beer. Although Nick had rarely seen Steve truly drunk, Steve drank enough beer on a regular basis that he wore a perpetual expression of someone with a slight buzz on. However, there was no evidence that now as he gazed furiously at Carter. "How about it, Cannon? Me and you, we go a few rounds, here and now," Steve drawled casually. Eyeing the beer bottle in Steve's hand, Carter smirked and said, "I doubt you'd feel anything, Pearson. As much as I'd love pounding your ass, I'm afraid my efforts would be wasted." Before he said, the plate umpire shouldered his way past the knot of players and interposed himself between Steve and Carter. Not much older than the field umpire, he apparently was made of sterner stuff, and he fiercely announced, "The game's over. Break it up or I'll call the cops." Sneering one more time at Steve, Carter nodded and jerked his way towards the team, and they began to walk away. However, he had only taken a few steps before he stopped and turned back towards Nick, who still lay on the ground, fighting to get his air back. "You're a loser and a screw-up, Hollister," he said. "Always have been, always will be. If you ever finish anything you start, please let me know so I can personally witness that miracle." He snickered and walked off. The ball game was finally over. Oh my gosh, Michael, what did you do to that poor boy? No, I love this. Fantastic start getting into the characters, driving this along. If you have the opportunity, look it up. This book's on Amazon. I'll have all the links down below. Stop by there. Let Michael know that you saw it here. And we'll see you next time on the first chapter. Hey, I hope you liked today's first chapter novel. I'll see you next week. I try to get these out about once a week. Anyway, if you're an author and you think your book would be a great match for this podcast, reach out to me. I'm at Larry Hoy Author, boom, 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 on Facebook. And if you're a reader and you want to check out a great book series, Hit World, the Red Label set. Bullet for Shooter, Demon's Kiss, they're out there on Amazon. You can't miss them. But right now, I am your author, biker, writer, legend, Larry Hoy. Find me on Facebook, Larry Hoy Author, or you've got my YouTube channel. Just ring down there and subscribe. Anyway, I'll see you next week right here on First Chapter Podcast. Bye.